I began my journalism in Australia, where I grew up, before moving to London, where I've been based most of my life. I've been a foreign correspondent, documentary filmmaker and war reporter, beginning with the war in Vietnam, which I covered until the last day. I've had a long association with the Middle East. I first went to Palestine in 1966, and in 1970 I was in the streets of Cairo for the epic funeral of Gamal Abdel Nasser. I was the first British correspondent to reach Egypt during the war in 1973 and witnessed the extraordinary elation on the streets when it seemed as if the Arab world might defeat Israel. My longest friendships have been with Palestinians. I feel strongly that until the great injustice of Palestine is put right and all Palestinians are allowed to return to their homeland, there'll be no peace in the Middle East. Journalism is meant to be about truth, and that perhaps is the most important truth in the world today. My name is John Pilger.
How impoverished, how helpless does a country have to be before it's no longer seen as a threat by the United States? If governments won't help them, why can't they leave them alone? America and Europe hold most of the world's surplus food. We feed it to animals.
Since 1945, the United States has attempted to overthrow 50 governments, many of them democracies. In the process, 30 countries have been attacked and bombed, causing the loss of countless lives. My interest in journalism began very early. I delivered newspapers at about the age of 10, and I can remember loving it. I loved the whole idea of newspapers, and the romance of newspapers became quite important to me. I actually read them too as a kid, which was unusual, I think, at that time. And when I was at high school in Sydney with a friend, I started a newspaper called The Messenger. I went straight from high school to the Sydney Daily Telegraph, where I was apprenticed as a cadet journalist. And I spent almost 3 to 4 years learning the craft of journalism from pretty well just about every angle. It was only later, when I arrived in London after spending a year as a freelance journalist in Italy, I arrived in London and joined Reuters, and then I joined the London Daily Mirror, that I think the type of journalism that I wanted to do really began to emerge. And this was the 1960s. Newspapers were starting to respond to the great movements of change in the world, and particularly in Western countries. And I was, I think, very much a beneficiary of that, in that I was allowed to travel the world to report about these changes. The first, actually, assignment that I had from the Mirror was called Youth in Action. And the assignment was to find young volunteers who were helping people.
What is anthrax and what does it do?
It's an infectious disease which is due to a bacillus of charbon.
And I was able to write about countries that many readers knew very little about. In Latin America, it took me to the Middle East for the first time. It took me to Africa, and gave me a sense of the world. It also gave me a sense of the great divisions in the world, and that journalism really had a part to play on behalf of humanity. That's always been very important as far as I'm concerned, that too many journalists, too many journalistic institutions see themselves as expressing the ambitions, the designs of power, the people at the top. I feel that journalism should be expressing the humanity of people, if not at the bottom, but of people generally. Well, in my journalism, I try to give a sense of the way power works by starting with the lives, specific examples of the lives of ordinary people and how that power is imposed on them. I made my first television documentary for World in Action. It was called The Quiet Mutiny, and it was about the insurrection of conscripted troops within the US Army in Vietnam.
Tonight, a personal report by the Daily Mirror's special correspondent, John Pilger.
The grunts in 1970 are a very different kind of American foot soldier. They are mostly from a world unknown to their commanders. They are the graduates of an American rebellion that stemmed from the war they have been sent here to fight. And quietly but massively, they have brought that rebellion with them here to Vietnam.
Beneath this snowy metal cold and green.
It introduced me to the effect of television, because all hell broke loose after that film. The American ambassador, who was a friend of President Nixon, personally complained. I was summoned to the Independent Television Authority which regulated television then. But it was, I think, the first documentary to really tell that story of the breakup of the US Army from within. And it was that probably, as much as anything else, drove the US out of Vietnam.
I couldn't see any purpose in the war back home. It never been explained to me why we're actually here. And I really had nothing against these people. I want to kill them.
Give me my freedom for as long as I be. All I ask of living is to have no chains on me. All I ask of living is to have no chains on me. And all I ask of dying is to go naturally. You only wanna go naturally. Here I go!
There is something really absurd about wars. They don't have a logic. Yes, if you're defending your country from an invasion, that has a logic. But most of the time, they don't have a logic. And they take on this sort of momentum, this craziness of their own. And I certainly I saw it as both frightening and crazy. I believe words should be used, the kind of words that are consciously not used in so-called mainstream reporting, such as the word imperialist. The war on terror is a perfect example of imperialism. I mean, there is no war on terror. You can't have a war on a noun, on a word. Whose terror, you know? Most terror, in fact, is state terror. The privatized terror, that is Al-Qaeda and one or two others, is small by comparison with state terror. So which war on terror? The whole thing is a nonsense. The war on terror was a sort of advertising slogan, and it was meant to promote a product called imperialism.
What about Israeli terrorism now?
The language of terrorism you have to be very careful with. Terrorism means deliberately targeting civilians in a kind of warfare. Israel specifically targets, to the best of its ability, Palestinian terrorist organizations.
All right. When an Israeli sniper shoots an old lady with a cane trying to get into a hospital for her chemotherapy treatment in front of a lot of the world's press, for one, and frankly we'd be here all day with other examples, isn't that terrorism?
I don't know the case you're speaking about, but I can be convinced of one thing. An Israeli who takes aim, even an Israeli sniper, is taking aim at those engaged in terrorism. Unfortunately, in every kind of warfare, there are cases of civilians who are accidentally killed.
What right have you to create somebody else's homeland?
I think journalism is essentially about humanity, but it's about memory, about ensuring that we don't forget. And that has always interested me. It's always interested me to go after the story, if not before it. That's when truths are more likely to be found. And I think that developed. I didn't start off like that, but it certainly developed. The more I travel in the so-called developing world, the more I realized how little we knew about it and how distorted our picture of it was. And that's, I suppose, been a theme, and that informs my judgment when I'm choosing a story. I mean, for many years, of course, what I've done is gone back. I think that's very important. It's gone back to where I've made a film or where I've reported. I've made 5 films on Cambodia. I've made, for instance, my film on the Palestinians. The first film was made, I think, in 1976. Palestine is still the issue. In 2002, I made another one from Palestine with exactly the same title, for the very good reason that Palestine is still the issue. So that it's that continuity, I think, that of drawing all the pieces together, putting the pieces in a jigsaw puzzle.
This film is about the Palestinians and a group of courageous Israelis united in the oldest human struggle to be free.
There is only one way of ending this. It's ending occupation. Because occupation has become the cancer that is eating the lives of both people.
What the occupation did for us, it reduced us into animals in a way that sometimes I'm ashamed to say that I'm in Israel.
I've always felt that if anyone really needs convincing about Palestine, they should just go and watch a checkpoint. Any checkpoint. Small checkpoints, big checkpoints. And to see the way people are treated in their own country. And much of that film was shot at checkpoints.
The truth is that Israelis will never have peace until they recognize that Palestinians have the same right to the same peace and the same independence that they enjoy.
Politics is a major example of the word that we didn't have 20-odd years ago, and that's marketing. Didn't exist. Barack Obama is a complete creation of marketing. No, he's no different from other presidents. He's not changing anything. In fact, he's carrying on really what the last president did. That's very obvious. Various wars and things. But he's a brilliant marketing exercise. And I think when people understand that, it was called once, the founder of public relations was an American called Edward Bernays, who was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And he said public relations or marketing, he described as an invisible government. And I think when people understand the nature of that invisible government, they really will understand more about how power works. You know, basic question, what do we ask or demand of powerful governments, the US government, UK governments? in relation to the Middle East, that they get out of other people's countries. Simple.
Said to the people of Iraq that our quarrel was not with them, but instead with their leadership, and above all with
foreign policy must have an ethical dimension and must support the demands of other peoples for the democratic rights which we insist.
You, the people of Iraq, are not our enemy. We do not seek your destruction.
Ali Rafa Aswadi, 9 years old,
Yes.
present to us with a progressive pallor and
He has
leukemia.
That's what has happened here in Iraq, where almost 10 years of extraordinary isolation imposed by the UN and enforced by America and Britain have killed more people than the 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan, including 500,000 young children. The embargo was not a news story. Hardly anyone talked about it. Hardly anyone reported it. And if it was reported, it was usually reported as all Saddam Hussein's fault. Iraq's problem for Western power was its independence. That's intolerable. And it's the same problem that Iran poses. Doesn't matter who's running it, but if it's not run by our people and it's independent, there's a problem. Journalists can be objective, yes. Where it goes wrong is when objectivity is used as a propaganda term to replace the truth. So you sometimes hear objectivity being used in a sense that, well, there are two sides, and I'm in the middle, and I'm objective, but very little of it has got to do with the truth. I think you can be objective. There's no point not being, really. You can't be objective as far as injustice is concerned. You can't be. It's not possible.
The Coca-Cola Company naturally doesn't like the word empire.
This film is about the people of Nicaragua and their unique struggle.
Where is Cambodia?
They are dying because they have virtually nothing of value to eat.
Why? Apartheid continues.
But is Japan really that different?
I also believe that Bangladesh could become the world's most ignored country.
As long as journalists keep reminding themselves that they are there really to represent, in a sense, represent their viewers and readers and listeners, not the people who seek to control them, then I think you have real journalism. Truth is a difficult word. There are many truths, and there are many versions of the truth. The truth is there. There are many truths. You've got to find it and report it.